I think we're good. Sorry about that, everybody. We had a few technical issues getting going this afternoon, but thank you for being here today. We want to welcome you to Build, Buy, and Dominate. I am Tony Parmenter.
I'm Matt Hicken.
We are going to be talking today about building a book or buying a book of business to build and to grow. And so as we go through this, we want to go through just kind of some basics that you need to know as you have these meetings with us. First is housekeeping. If you have any questions, we have a chat box. The chat will pop up on our screen, as well as we have a page there. If you need links or any information to what we're talking about, we'll be able to share that with you. And so as we go through this broadcast, please let us know with questions.
I would say, so if you've never attended a broadcast with Tony and myself, you'll know that we tend to talk fast. We've got a lot of information we want to share, given the length of time we've been doing this, and how many best practices we've seen. We have a lot to share with you. However, we can share a whole lot of stuff that wouldn't mean much to you. So we want to make sure that you ask questions, drop in the chat, give us feedback. There will be points in time that we ask you for that feedback. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, the big key here is stay to the very end. We're not only will we be giving you a lot of very important information at the very end, the actual critical piece to buying a book in, how to onboard that book, but also at the very end, you'll have the opportunity to answer a brief questionnaire and then get everything that's in this goodie bag, which is awesome. So very first off, as part of buying a book of business, there is aspects to partnerships. So you will get our Bill Good Guide to Partnerships. And then secondary, we did a great recording a long while back with Jeff Concepcion, talking through how to go through acquisitions, additions, and mergers. And so you will get access to that recording, but just stay to the very end to get that.
I think we've got all our technical difficulties worked out now, so we should be good.
Way to jinx it.
We want to get going with you guys today. At the end, we'll have a link to help you get the goodie bag, so definitely take a look at that. But what we want to talk about is the process that you're going to go through to acquire a book of business. We're going to talk about preparing, finding, evaluating, and then ultimately integrating this book of business into your existing practice. As Matt and I have talked to a lot of financial advisors over the 23, 24 years that we've been doing this, we found that there are those who are incredibly successful. They do this incredibly well. They bring on a new book of business. They find a lot of new assets. They have a lot of new growth, and that creates a great deal of new opportunity for them. And then there are those who don't. There are those who flounder and languish, maybe lose some of the primary or the important accounts. And that's what we want to help you kind of avoid. So we're going to go through that whole process. The first thing, though, that we're going to talk about is why and why not you're going to buy a book of business. But when you're talking about why and why not you're going to buy a book of business, there are good reasons to buy a book of business. There are bad reasons to buy a book of business. Well, let's start with the bad reasons, because candidly, I hear the bad reasons more than the good reasons. Mm-hmm. Okay. So one of the biggest reasons not to buy a book of business is just to add a block of assets under management to your book. The reality is, when you're looking at it strictly from assets under management, there's a bunch of other factors, and we'll talk about all the factors in the book. But one of the biggest factors that you have to look at is how many households, how much service, how much additional onboarding and time is it going to take on that big block of assets under management?
Yeah, because honestly, I mean, what happens is often advisors approach us and they say, "Hey, look, this sounds like a great idea," mm-hmm. and I find that often it's because the mental state is that we're still thinking about acquiring assets, right? Which is on the retail side is done on the individual basis. So I brought in this account, it was $1 million. I brought in this account, it was 500,000. I brought in this account, it was 5 million. Oh, cool. I've got this opportunity to bring in this account that's 50 million in assets. That sounds so awesome. I'll just get it all done in one fell swoop. It's not the assets in this case. If you're buying a book, that 50 million is not a single individual, which would be nice. But it's a whole lot of households. Typically, you're looking at between 100 to 125 households on average for that size of a book. And so now you're saying, okay, you have to onboard and go through all the process with 125 households as quickly as you can. And that's where it becomes, okay, now it's a different factor. So just wanted you to think about that first.
And you'll hear us talk about this several times today, but one of the main numbers that we talk about is you really have about a 6-month window in which you want to introduce yourself to, onboard and integrate all of these new households into your existing practice. If you're buying a book of business and it's going to take you 2 to 3 years to integrate that wholly, by the time you get around to reallocating assets for some of those books or some of those accounts, when you get around to actually sitting down with them face to face, they don't really care anymore. They've kind of moved on. They've kind of felt like the person left in the dark sort of thing. And so you really have this narrow window of time in which you have to establish that credibility. And you hear us at Bill Good Marketing talk about the trusted advisor relationship. And that's what you have to build in that first 6 months, and then integrate everything else into your standard client service practice. So you want to make sure you have the team in place that's going to allow you to do this. You got to make sure you have bandwidth in your schedule as a financial advisor. You need to make sure you have the technology necessary to facilitate automating, adding this many new people into your client service practice, into your communication practices. All those things have to be in place. And we'll talk about some of those critical factors. We've seen advisors who've taken like 3 years to integrate $60 to $70 million in assets. One case that we're working with, awesome team, great people. They're working very, very hard. But when you're 3 years into taking over a book of business, and some of these people you've never actually had a conversation with in the 3 years that you've been the broker of record on the accounts, a lot of those people are concerned about why they're just now beginning to hear from you. So that 6 month window is very, very important. So
yeah, well, and another part to the 6 month window, there's multiple reasons behind it. So I also want to point out the fact that, look, like typically when you're onboarding a new book of business, that is your focus, and it can be something that you can not downgrade, lower the level of services you're providing to your existing book, the book that you already have, in order to get your arms around the new one. Well, after 6 months, it's time to get back to a normal routine and make sure that your arms are wrapped around the book that you had before you bought the new one. And then also that you have to be looking for the next, right? Because we all know that, especially in a lot of the books that you're going to be buying today, there is a good amount of assets that are going to be going out through regular withdrawals because they are retirees. And we'll be talking about this a little bit later, but those retirees are going to be taking monies, and therefore we have to be bringing in new assets just to compensate from that, not to mention anything going on in the markets. And then plus, obviously, we all want to grow. So that 6 month time frame is a time where you are dedicated to wrapping your arms around the new book. At the end of that, it's time. You've got to get back to your book, and you've got to get out there and be looking for the next new assets. So any longer than that, and you start getting tied up. And like we said, this team that we're just wrapping up things up, they are just finally in 2025 going to be able to get back to some major prospecting. And they've been kind of stagnant for the few years, and it's been a mess, and there's been a lot of problems with it. So we don't want you to see that. Get that time frame. Just make sure if you're going into this that it's not for those reasons. It's for the good reasons.
So the good reasons obviously are, because I said, don't do it just for the assets under management. Yes, you want to look for a book of business that has a decent number of assets under management. But with that, what you're really looking for is, what has been the status of the current FA on that book? Have they been very basic rudimentary planning? Have they done a poor system of reviews and assessing the needs of those clients? Because what we're hoping to find is a book of business that has a decent amount of existing assets, but is likely to have additional assets that the advisor has not tapped. Whether those are accounts held at other locations, whether that's he's just never dived into all of the assets that they have. But we want that as you're doing this 6 month onboarding process, meeting with these people, talking with these people, we want you to be finding new opportunities, new assets. Realistically, we'd like to see you grow, not nearly by the same amount that the book itself is, but by a decent amount of that book in terms of percentage. We'd love to see, like, can you get an additional 25% or 10% out of that book in just new assets that are found above and beyond what's already included in the book that you're purchasing. And the other thing, and this one's kind of an iffy, is if you're in a fairly small market space, or you're chasing a very limited niche of individuals. And buying this book of business basically allows you to take over and dominate and become the preeminent voice in that market space. That can be of benefit as well. That's usually secondary or third down the list, because the reality is, for you to dominate a market simply by acquiring a book. And I think Matt and I, when we were talking about this, he said, if you're in a small market and there's 5 advisors chasing this market, and 3 of them are all, in their 70s and they're a partnership and they all want to retire and back out and they're looking to sell their book. Well, sure, if you took over that practice that those 3 were backing out and you took that over and you were number 4, there's maybe one other guy that's got a little bit of like the scraps left behind sort of thing. But the likelihood that you're going to take up 70% of the market by acquiring a book is usually a pretty limited opportunity.
And if you've never done it, dominating a market, like once you become the dominant advisor in a market, it just kind of feeds on itself. It's a beautiful thing. So if that is a possibility with this acquisition, that's a great thing. And then again, it is, we kind of downplay it a little bit just because I don't want your mind focused just on assets. But especially in what we've seen with the way advisors are managing assets or were managing assets previously versus the new way of managing, there is a good opportunity to find new assets out there that were just left on the table. If the previous advisor was simply just creating the mutual fund portfolios or going through the motions on a basic investment management and not really taking care of the full comprehensive view, the chances that there's more assets than just that you're purchasing are pretty high. And that makes it a wonderful opportunity. And then obviously the big opportunity that we haven't even talked about, and the reason why we're even doing this webinar, is because there are a lot of books out there for sale. There are a lot of advisors that are moving through this. Now, a couple of things that obviously you need to do in order to prepare. So now we know why we're going after this. It's all for good reasons. Now, what do we need to have in place in order to get there? The very first thing that I want to take a look at as far as preparation is the team. And to me, that's the most important aspect. I know it says number 2 on here, but it is the most important thing. So the key with the team is who is doing what do we have established as far as the work being accomplished. And ultimately, everybody needs to have a role in this bringing on of a new book of business. So there's going to be an administrative thing. I've talked to several advisors who were onboarding a new book, and they said, oh no, it's all part of the Schwab network. It's the same firm. So there's really no paperwork. There's always paperwork. When you meet with that client, of course, they're going to need to adjust their ACH or their withdrawals. They're going to need to adjust some portfolio things. They're going to have that outside asset that needs to now have you as an advisor of record added to it. There's a lot of things that do occur in that process, even when it's a lower level of paperwork that needs to be done. So there is going to be that. Now, one of the things that I often see is, oh, well, but my assistant is actually okay. They're not overloaded right now, so they could totally handle this. It's not just how they're doing currently and how overloaded they are or not overloaded they are. It's how are they going to be doing when we bring in all these other households to now service. So do evaluate that thoroughly and understand who is going to be doing what in this onboarding process. Sit down, have a team meeting and discuss it. If your team is maxed out, this is not the time to add a book. Finally, with that is, okay, when bringing in these households, this is not just new households that we have to serve. It's the ongoing service of existing households. And if we plan on doing this more in the future, as Bill Good says, the team member is required before the growth. If we're going to be buying more books, maybe you need to bring in somebody now so that they can see the process of onboarding this book. Maybe you'll get it with the purchase of the book, but you need somebody that's going to be able to handle all of these greater number of households. So what we see is the average advisor is going to handle between 200 to 250 households per advisor. And so if you just bought a book of 250 households and you have 200 of your own, you may need to look at having a service advisor or some other agreement in order to make sure somebody is able to meet with those clients. But that has to be in place. So the next thing I want to talk about is this idea of the investment and planning philosophy. If you are with your current book of business trying to organize how your accounts are run, whether or not you're following set models or if each individual account has their own setup, if you are at a stage where you are just now starting to use Money Guide Pro, or you're just now starting to use some of these other planning software platforms, or you've just started to coordinate kind of sort of half-heartedly this work with other professionals, and you're trying to build this into your business, now's not the time to add a book. You need that in place first. And the reason being is that you need your existing book served extremely well and efficiently in order to bring in the new book. And when I bring in the new book, I have to have a consistent story that stays the same, that I know exactly how to operate and move into. Otherwise, yeah, we're going to go well beyond that 6-month onboarding timeframe. So, was one of the minor issues with this team we mentioned. So you have to have a consistent philosophy and way of applying that philosophy in place. And then finally, have the systems necessary to do it. Can you blast out a message to everybody immediately? Right. What does your calendaring system look like? Is it easy to get in on your calendar? Or who is managing the calendar? What processes do you have automated through workflows or activity plans in your CRM to make sure that as we're bringing in these households, there's things that are being done without you having to do work or go through a thought process to get it done? We have to automate as much as possible in this, or there's no way you're meeting that 6-month time frame. So these are just several of the things that you have to have in place to prepare your business to go out there and bring in a book. Now, so this is stuff done long before we make the agreement to buy, right? This is not a, hey, I made the agreement, should I hire? Now you're a little behind.
And so in terms of the systems, the other thing that I want to say is this, and I think this gets missed a lot. A lot of people think they're going to build the system as they go. What really has to happen is, number one, you need to have, here's how our client service model works. Here's how we deliver. Hey, I've got, 150 clients. They're broken into platinum, gold, silver, and bronze. And within those subcategories, here's how often I meet with them. Here's how often I talk to them. That whole process has to be nailed down and running smoothly before you even start looking at the book. But then as you start looking for a book, you have to say, how am I going to introduce myself to them? How am I going to bring them in, and what's the order, and how am I going to prioritize who I'm going to meet with? And then as I bring them onto the system, I need to seamlessly be doing that evaluation, saying this one's a platinum, they get plugged into the existing platinum process. This one's a gold, they get plugged into the existing gold process. Because one of the biggest places that assets are lost is you meet with somebody, you go over your new investment philosophy that you're going to be introducing to them and bringing them up in. You're starting the process of repapering accounts if that needs to be done, or just introducing them to the portfolio that they're going to be in. And then what begins to happen is you hand them off to service, and then it's radio silence. They don't know what's going on. They're not meeting your team. They're not meeting your service person. They're not getting notified as soon as their first new statements come out. They're not getting a market update letter when the markets all of a sudden freak out. There's all these core things that are part of your client service model that they need to go through the onboarding process, meet you, be introduced to you in your process, and then seamlessly hand it off to that. If that's not able to happen without you stopping and having conversations with your client service agent or your servicing FA every time you bring on a new account, it's going to break down. The wheels are going to come off the bus, and there's going to be some amount of the assets left in the wind that you lose the opportunity to bring those over and find additional assets. Mm-hmm. So the next thing that we talk about after prep is then we talk about, okay, now that we know what it's going to take for us to be able to bring this book of business in, where do we go and look? Where do we go and find this book of business? So in terms of where to look, there are a lot of different private companies out there that specialize in placing you with potential matches, introducing you to people who are selling their book. There are people out there who just produce lists and go, here's a list of people who are trying to sell their book or look to retire in the next few years. So look through those different services. There are some matchmaking services out there. And the best example I can give you is I think it's called the Kingdom Advisors one's the one that matches. Yeah, they match Christian advisors with other Christian advisors that are looking to hand off their book. So if you find yourself in that kind of mindset, there are services out there. So you want to look, are there services that specialize in my niche? Are there services that specialize in the kind of people that I deal with? The second option is, and a lot of firms have moved this direction over the years because firms don't want to lose the assets that they've, brought up advisors to bring in. And so more and more firms are offering matchmaking services. And so they're looking for local advisors who are somewhat similar to you in terms of size and makeup of client assets and stuff like that. So those are the two primary ways that you can run into it. Obviously, you could go to a conference and bump into a buddy, make friends, and then that gentleman says, hey, I've been doing this a long time. I'm ready to, take the pony and set it out to pasture sort of thing. So I need somebody to take over these clients. Those kinds of things can happen too. Whatever the case may be, whatever your means of finding, then what you have to do is you have to begin assembling the information necessary to determine, is this going to work? So the first thing we look at is compatibility. Is this advisor's mentality, the direction they want to go, the timeline they have for exit, does it align with me and what I want to be doing? Does their book match up with my book, which is a huge one? And we'll talk about that when we get into the valuation. But you need to say, is the client asset makeup workable? Is the way they're managing their assets workable? Is the way they serve those clients workable? And does it match with what I'm doing well enough? If there's not a compatibility, and Matt and I were talking about this, and one of the things he said is, you have to look at, are they delivering a higher level of service? So basically you taking over this book is a service reduction, because that's a compatibility problem at that point in time. Generally speaking, if coming on with you is going to be an increase in service, that's not a compatibility problem. That's just better service for those accounts. But you need to be sure that that's going to be worthwhile for you.
Well, and part of that too, like for example, I had one advisor that had bought a book of business, but the business was actually 3 hours away. Mm-hmm. So most of the clients, the majority, I mean, obviously every book has clients spread around, but the majority of the clients were in that area 3 hours away, which, okay, great. Well, those clients were used to meeting with that financial advisor there in that city together face to face. Can you do that? Like, can you drive those 3 hours, set up a couple of days a week and be in that city to meet with folks to make sure that service is continued? Mm-hmm. If not, then, well, maybe this isn't something to look at. But now, and that being said, I do want to make sure it's very clear. We have seen and have watched successfully advisors purchase books of business that are at a distance away. But the way they set up the services, the way they did things, they were able to coordinate it so that it was able to either be virtual meetings or things over the phone. So there wasn't a whole lot of need for the travel. So, but those are all things that you have to assess in this compatibility stage.
Yeah. One of the teams I was working with that was buying a book of business in another state, several states away. One of the things they looked at, how did the existing advisor manage the service? Well, the existing advisor was in state, but he predominantly preferred to do things via phone calls and Zoom. They almost never met with that advisor in person. Well, they made a commitment that they wanted to be able to go to that state, meet with those people in person, as well as host a client appreciation event in the state. Well, that already is a major uptick in service. And then they can continue doing most of the meetings via phone calls and Zoom. That's what those clients had come to expect. So it is possible, as Matt said, you just have to make sure that it's not a major downgrade in service to make that change. Mm-hmm. So the third thing that we talk about is setting appropriate expectations, which kind of overlaps into what we talked about with the compatibility. But the big piece here is, what is the advisor's timeline? This advisor who's trying to sell his or her practice, they're trying to exit the practice and move on to other things. When do they want to do that? What is the timeline they want to do? And what do they foresee being their timeline? Some advisors will say, well, I just want to hand it off to somebody else. They want to stick around for 5 or 6 years and shoot the bull and hang out with them and chat with them and stuff. Well, that poses a litany of challenges for you as the acquiring advisor, because the guy they've known for 20, 30 years is still kind of looming in the background, never quite going away. It makes it really hard for you to become the 100% trusted advisor on that account. So you really need to identify, when do you want to exit? When do you want to take off? Well, I'm looking in 5 years. Great. Well, then what I'd like to do is maintain a level of communication with you, continue to talk with you, discuss what the buyout would look like. And about 4 years from now, if you're going to leave in 5, we'll begin the process. And then we really want to do a hard press that last 6 months. And then you can take off and go do whatever you want to go on the ski trips and go hit all the ski resorts across the US and Canada. Great. You can take off and do that and not necessarily stick around. And realistically, we want to move them out as quickly as possible, because again, you're trying to position yourself as the trusted advisor. Right away, once the transition happens, you need to be positioned as the owner of the book, the primary advisor, the person they're going to be talking to and working with going forward. If that advisor is going to stay on for a short duration of time to help out, they stay on as an employee of the company that's owned by you, and maybe as like a relationship manager to make phone calls, chat with people, and then set up the phone calls with the acquiring advisor. But you don't want them acting as the decider, as the decision maker on the accounts, as the person giving financial advice. So when you're talking to them, set those expectations with this financial advisor. What are you looking for in terms of an exit? Are you willing to, step aside when that time comes? Because we don't really want you hanging out and just kind of continuing to give advice for the next 5 years.
Yeah. Well, and some of these expectations and start making sure that you set them appropriately comes from our next step, right? Which is, how do you value this book of business? Now, whether you're listening to this broadcast because you're looking to sell your book, or if you are looking to buy businesses, all of these things are absolutely necessary for you to kind of go through. So there are key questions to ask. There are things to dig in and ask about. But some of those expectations have to do with exactly what are you going to pay them for this book? And then how are you going to pay them? If I'm buying a book of business, that some of the information we talk through here in a second is warrants a need or a desire in my mind to make sure that those assets stay on, there's a high likelihood that they're going to leave because of the level of change they're going to go through, then I may acquire this book at a smaller upfront with an ongoing pay in order to kind of have the incentive for all of us to do a good work on keeping those clients in the fold. So all of this is stuff that I want to start setting out in expectations in advance, because you may get an advisor that says, oh no, I've heard that businesses are going for 2 to 3 times trailing 12. And then you open up the book and you realize, well, 70% of the assets are commission based, 30% are fee based, and those fee based assets, they're all in stuff that you would need to move out of, because maybe it's mutual fund portfolios and you do ETFs. Whatever it is, now you're suddenly going to have to knock through a whole lot of changes for these people. I need to set expectations for what the advisor is going to get paid for this, because that does and should diminish the value that advisor gets out of their book, because obviously it has less value to you. So very first thing, I'm going to take a look at the AUM, and I'm going to look at it in multiple different ways to try to see exactly what is the makeup of that assets under management. So, and then I'm also going to look at how they've been servicing those assets. Do they do actual comprehensive financial planning, or have they just put together an e-money printout for everybody? In which case, okay, well, I could probably assume there's more assets available if I really delve deep into the comprehensive planning, or at the very least, I could probably delve deep and get some good introductions. So there's a greater value in the book. It doesn't mean you pay for it, but it does show that you're going to get value, right? We all want to pay less than the value of the thing we're getting.
That's the goal.
So I'm going to look at that. Finally, ultimately, again, I'm looking to see, there's going to be a possibility for more assets that have been left on the table that I could get if I bought this book of business. Second thing, I'm going to take a look at the average household size for those assets. Again, and this kind of comes in multiple different ways. I don't like the word average because it's just like, sure, it's a mathematical thing that doesn't mean anything. So the idea is I'm going to take a look and see, so if I'm buying a $50 million book and 20 million of that is with one household, I'm going to maybe lower my value, because if I lose that one household, if that one household already has a secondary in the wings waiting for their current guy to retire, you've got a big hurdle to overcome, and 20 million of the 50 million assets bailing on you right off the bat is going to hurt. So I'm going to look at the makeup of that. I'm also going to look at it and say, okay, well, my average account size that I'm shooting for is $1 million plus. The average size of the account in this book is 250,000. Do you actually want to add a whole bunch of households at 250,000? Now, I would if I feel like there's a whole lot more left on the table with these households, or I may decide actually no, there's not probably a lot on the table, and $250,000 average size accounts is not something I'm going to specialize in. So do delve into what the assets look like. What is the makeup of that? And then I'm also going to look at by asset, not by household number, but by asset. In the top tier households, what percentage of them are that 65 and older range? Better yet, what are the percentage of them are the 70 and older range? If I've got, a good 50% of the assets locked into 70 plus year olds, I'm going to be struggling to pay more for that book of business, right? I'm going to lower the what I pay for it, or I'm going to back out, because this is That's a whole lot of service, a whole lot of work for assets that are going to eventually go out the door pretty quick. So you need to evaluate that. And then overall, what percentage of the total book it actually does meet your ideal household? As we know, birds of a feather flock together. We can definitely get introductions and referrals from that group. We find that if you're applying all of the stuff that Bill Good Marketing teaches, that especially in those top tier households, you can get combined from referrals and introductions from that group, at least one referral and introduction per year from at least 20% of those households. Well, if I'm buying in, whatever 50 new households that meet my ideal standard, that's awesome, right? Because now I've got that many referrals that I'm going to get right off the bat. So, 10 or so referrals a year just because I bought this book, that's awesome. So all of this stuff are things that I'm going to be considering and asking about as you're going through this process with an advisor that's looking to sell. Obviously, I'm going to look at what percentage of the assets are on commission based versus ongoing recurring fees, and that's all kinds of recurring, whether it's managed money or other assets, maybe it's UITs or something. Which obviously comes to the next point. I'm going to look at, okay, well, what are those assets? One of the things I found, especially as I've helped advisors look at a lot of different books, it always gives me pause and a little bit of we need to delve further kind of a thought anytime that I see some of these different products out there in a book. And the reason being is that when I see that, I often see that advisor is often looking for these more interesting products. And not only are those sometimes harder to manage, sometimes they're way more illiquid. And then sometimes they were, trying to put this delicately, they were sold by an advisor that didn't fully, either in ability or in verbiage, explain what they were. And now you're buying a book of business of assets that if the client suddenly looks at it, the market takes a turn in that particular asset, and the client says, hey, what is this? What did you sell me? Well, you bought that book. That's yours now. Right. That's on you. So you have to be very careful about those things. So I find that if there are these interesting products that definitely have their place, I want to be very clear, and they do have their place. But if I start seeing a lot of it, I'm going to pump the brakes on buying that book, and I'm going to really delve deep into this. Look at how things were sold, look at who owns it, make sure everything's on the up and up to ensure you're not buying some stuff that's going to end up going on your U4. So definitely be careful about where the assets are that you're looking at. Next, I'm going to talk to them about their team. And I hated saying this, but what assets are, besides the assets, are you getting? So team members, materials, processes. I had one book that was purchased. The book was fine. It was average. But the purchase was actually the process. They had trademarked a process that matched this other advisor, but it had a lot of good graphics, a lot of good design work. It was trademarked. It was worth it, right? That was worth a buy to get that locked into your business now, because it's a system you follow, and now you've got a trademarked process. So there are those assets that you also need to.
Or there's the other side.
There's the other side of it. What are the liabilities associated with that book? So, for example, I've seen one where they just barely bought into a lease on a huge, massive printer that was not needed by the acquiring advisor, but the lease had to be paid out, so it had to be negotiated. It's not a big deal, but it has to be negotiated as part of the buyout, so that you're not paying for it as the buying advisor, the exiting advisor is. So there's those things. Or any of the other services, right? So are there softwares? Are there programs? Are there subscription models that they're signed on to that would either be of value or not be of value to you? Either way, these are payments that the practice that you're buying has to make. You have to understand where those are and what they're doing and what their value could be or is to you. And then finally, I'm going to look at, as we've been talking, I'm going to look at what have the services been. Is this something that I can do? I've seen it where there's a retiring advisor that had a small book of business, 50, 60 households. Sounds easy to onboard, but because it was a small book and he just decided to set up his books this way, all the clients were used to meeting with him at a restaurant in this city. Cool, but that's not that makes it harder to serve. Um, and it's because of the change, which is kind of the overall theme of the valuation that you have to consider. Um,
What promises were made to staff?
exactly. Well, and yeah. So if there are any ongoing bonuses, I've seen that too, where certain team members were guaranteed 10% of the growth of the business. And that sounds all nice, but it's like that one, there's that, I don't know what's called, legend or whatever, of the king that granted the gentleman whatever wish he wanted. And he said, give me 1 grain of rice. And for every board, every block on a chessboard, double that grain. And the king's like, oh, yeah, whatever, that's easy. But by the end, it's something like 5 trillion grains of rice by doubling it, and you get to there. So it does seem that that's often the case with advisors and their promises to their team members. So be careful about that too. If somebody's expecting a 10% of all revenue growth, what does that mean if you just bought that team member's contract, so to speak, to work for you? So that's part of the liabilities and obligations that you got to look at. But again, like I said, ultimately, the big thing that you have to look at is what change is going to occur for the team and for this book of business, because we as human beings generally like to stay, objects in motion like to stay in motion or whatever.
Objects at rest like to stay at rest.
Yeah, we don't like change. And so if there is change, that becomes a hurdle to overcome. Now, you can overcome it with excellent service and excellent communication, but that hurdle becomes bigger and bigger and bigger depending upon how much change these people have to go through. So if it's, I'm not meeting with them in that restaurant, I can't stand that restaurant.
That's change.
That's change. If I have to, I'm not going to go to that city. They're going to have to do meetings with me like all my clients do and do it virtually. That's change. If it's, hey, I'm going to sit down with all these clients. Yes, yeah, sure. They've been in this mutual fund portfolio, but I'm moving them into an equity and ETF portfolio, along with this awesome municipal bond and fixed income portfolio that I put together. Super thought out and awesome, but they're going to have to make some trades, and they're going into that immediately because I refuse to manage these assets over time. That's major change, right? And especially if I'm looking at assets that, maybe the book is 40% of the assets are in taxable accounts. Now you're asking them to pay money to go through this change.
And those are some of the changes you probably already thought about, but think about some of the changes that probably wouldn't occur to you. We talked about the importance of a team, right? Well, if you're acquiring a business from a financial advisor and he's had that one service person who's been with him for 20 years and all of the clients know her, all of the clients have a relationship with her, they call her up periodically to ask how her dogs are doing, or, she's somebody who shows roses. And so they want to check in on how she's doing in the recent rose competition. Is that employee coming with you? And what change is going to be required of you to hold on to that employee? Because that employee carries a lot of the relationship with those clients. Losing her is a significant change to the relationship that the clients have. They have to meet a new service person. They have to meet a new salesperson. They got to meet a new advisor. So you got to say, if I hold on to this service person, what change do we have to take on in order to minimize the change for the clients? These are all the change balance, because the more change there is for the staff, the more change there is for the clients, the more risk you're taking at losing assets, at losing team members.
Yeah, and ultimately, all of these things, as far as the valuation is concerned, will dictate how much you're willing to offer for this book, which kind of goes back to those expectations. Maybe you're going to come in and offer something that they think is a lowball offer. But ultimately, when you go through a thorough evaluation like this and you really do evaluate it and look at the book and delve deep, which I used to do too, and you decide this is what this book is worth, stick to your guns. I've seen some that the selling advisor says, hey, that's not valuing this enough and you need to pay more for this. And the buying advisor, kind of gave in and relented, and it turned out they were right. And now suddenly the value they get from the book, the profit they get from that book is dampened because they didn't stick to their guns. So stick to your guns on it. Usually what we see is if everything's great, depending upon the situation as far as what you're going to get revenue wise, anywhere from 1 to 3 times trailing 12 makes sense today. And also the negotiation as far as how you pay that out there's all kinds of creative ways that I'm seeing that done now, which is really cool because that does allow for options on this valuation side, right? Because if I feel like, hey, they're going to have to go through a decent amount of change, I want insurances, so I'll pay you say I'm going to pay $1 million for this book. I'm going to pay you 250,000 up front. At the end of a year, I'll pay you, whatever percentage of the assets up to 300,000. And do that for the following year. And after 3 years, hopefully you've done all the work you need to keep everything else. And then the full $1 million has been paid out. So, but that model sets it up so that, hey, like if you pay them 250,000 for this book up front, and at the end of the year, that Mr. Big $20 million account decides to exit, yeah, you're paying much less now for the book without having to renegotiate things.
And back to what we talked about in terms of like the existing advisor's plan for exit and stuff, having a payout over 3 years, 4 years is a better setup, because if they're going to stick around and potentially help, they're supposed to be the connection point that's helping build your credibility, that's building your relationship. So if you're tying their payout to their ability to tie these folks to you and keep those for longer periods of time, it really behooves them. It drives them to build those relationships, to be like your biggest cheerleader and your biggest promoter as you build these relationships. So those kind of payout options really do, or buyout options really do help you get the most out of whatever the last 6, 12 months of that relationship will look like.
Yeah. Well, and just one thing on that too. And honestly, again, if you have any questions, please drop that in the chat. We'd love to be able to answer your questions. I know we're kind of zipping through a lot of this stuff, but if you want us to come back and reiterate something, let us know. And then the other thing is, again, at the end, one of the things as far as these negotiations go is partnership, right? There's some good retiring advisors that honestly, they're not ready to retire. I've met with several of them that they're ready to get this next leg, but they don't, it's the opposite of the problem of at the beginning of their career, they had no idea how to go get business. Now they know how to go get business. They just don't want to service it. And so having somebody come partner in like that is a great opportunity to almost seed a future purchase with this partnership. So again, the goodie bag does have a partnership guide, everything that you need to know about setting up a good partnership, if that's one of the options, plus a recording with somebody else that talks deeply about all of these aspects of acquiring books, merging with other books of business, but all of that stuff. So do stay to the end to get that goodie bag. But ultimately, again, I just want to reiterate, there's so many options, and we were happy to help you in any possible way we can. Just drop a line in here, this question, or of course, when you fill out the questionnaire, you can let us know that you need some help on this.
So now you've built up the front end. You've shopped around, you've found the book that you think is the right fit, you've evaluated it and found out this is a good fit. Now what I need to do is I need to begin the process of integrating this book into my book. Now remember, what we said is you have to have your existing client service model in place and functioning, because as you bring on these new assets, these new clients and these new households, you want them to seamlessly move into that new system. And so how do you do this? Well, first of all, you have to have a solid client retention strategy. You have to know, how often do I communicate with my clients? What are the channels through which I communicate with my clients? What are the critical meeting points and talking points where I can talk to those clients, make sure that they understand the next step in our relationship or the next phase in their retirement plan or whatever it may be. Now, what I have to do is I have to introduce these new and incoming clients to that. Typically, you start with an introduction letter. That should be coming from the advisor who's passing on, not selling, but passing on this book of business to you. And they're introducing you as the new person who's going to be building a relationship with them and kind of charting their future. And then there's a period, that 6-month period that we've talked about, where that advisor is making face-to-face introductions to his or her clients that you're now going to become the primary advisor for. And that happens through social meetings and social gatherings. That happens in meeting to review their accounts and talk about the investment philosophy and any of these changes that we've talked about. That client retention process on the back end has to be there, and that client introduction process has to be there. You move them through the introduction process. Here's the letters that we're going to send you. Here's what it looks like to be one of our clients. Here's what it looks like to communicate with us. Here's the events that we hold to educate you on things. And then you hand them off to that service program. We're a competent service staff. Now, you could have acquired that service assistant from the prior advisor. She's going to stay on with you guys for a couple of years till she decides to retire. Great. Then she's going to be part of that service introduction. Hey, I'm so excited to be part of Matt Hicken's new financial advisor team. I'm still going to be chatting with you guys. I'm going to following up up with you guys on these things. It might be your CSA, whomever that is, and really beginning to introduce them to the messages they're going to receive, the events they're going to attend, the communication they're going to get. What you want to do is in that period of time, that 6-month period where you're building the relationship, you want to introduce them to you as the financial advisor, what your investment philosophy is, and what that process, what that long-term relationship is going to look like. They should know what to expect from you. We do have some tools and resources that our clients use to kind of do that and demonstrate, here's what a client relationship with me looks like. Here's what you can expect from us, sort of thing. But you need to have that entire strategy down. The second thing you have to have is what we call your engagement strategy. How often are you meeting with them? Now, this is beyond just the regular reviews that you're going to be doing with them to discuss the next stage of the relationship. This is, when are we going to be meeting with them socially? When are we going to be meeting with them to do education? When are we going to be having phone calls to just check in and see how things are going? When are we going to try and arrange a nice dinner so they can introduce us to their friends or introduce us to their coworkers or to their social networks? Again, remember, we're trying to expand the value you're getting out of this book by finding additional assets. Now, that could be assets the client themselves has, but that could be, because they're a good center of influence, them introducing you into a network of people that the prior advisor didn't tap into, and you're finding new and additional assets. And so that engagement strategy and the process you use to engage them on a social level is very important. That already has to be in place for your existing clients. And like I said, you're going to meet with John and Betty Smith, and with the old advisor, he's going to introduce you, tell you all about them. You're going to introduce them to the new relationship. And then on the back end, you're going to go, John and Betty, they're well connected. There's a lot of financial opportunity. They're going into our book of silver clients. John and Betty, or excuse me, your platinum clients. I said silver, platinum clients. John and Betty, here's what it looks like to be one of our clients. Now, of course, they don't know that they're being put into the platinum category, but they're being told, here's how often you're going to hear from us. Here's how often we're going to meet with you. Here's how often we're going to go out and do stuff with you. And that begins setting the stage for that engagement that creates the opportunity. As you begin this process, you've done the introduction letter, you've done a series of communications to establish your identity as the trusted advisor in that relationship. And as you're meeting with them to show them what that client retention and engagement is going to look like, that's when you begin discussing and working on a process that allows the exit of the prior advisor to be a celebration of what that advisor has done. Matt and I are partial to this. If you've seen any of our webinars where we talk about buying books, selling books, retiring, stuff like that, one of the important things that we talk about is that exiting advisor needs to be exiting with purpose. They need to have decided what they're going to be doing with their life. And you have the opportunity to leverage that as a celebration of what that advisor has done for them up to that point in time and what's going to happen next for them in life.
Which honestly is a good point to bring up that maybe we missed earlier on. Is it so easy to find books for sale? Like, honestly, I mean, there's lists of them out there. It's easy to find. But what you've probably experienced, and would love to hear your thoughts in the chat, but is that when you go out there and you make an offer, even if somebody's put their book out there for sale, there's a good percentage of them that suddenly have seller's remorse and they don't want to do it. Or they say, oh yeah, no, I'm still going to do it for sure. I'm 100% going to do it. It's just not in 2025 anymore. Now it's in 2026. And then 2026 starts to roll on, and I'm really thinking 2027 is our year. It's going to be 2027 that we do this, and it's doing this. But so if you really want to help those advisors to let go and sell that book and come to you for that purchase, help them see that, number one, this is a continuation of their legacy, that's what you're going to be able to do. So your drip messages to them, your emails, your text messages, which should be happening. Like once you start this communication process, even if it's, I'm thinking I'm going to hold off on selling for another year, you drip, right? You should be on top of it and putting in those messages of, hey, by the way, I was going to ask you, Bob, what is your plan? Like day to day, like what are you going to do? You know, this is something we do for our clients all the time. I know you've done it for a wonderful, lengthy career, but have you ever done it for yourself? Not just financially, but on day 600 of being retired, what are the activities are you going to be participating in? What's the plan there? Maybe guide them on some options there. To me, the best option for financial advisors that I'll keep mentioning is that, go volunteer. There's so many of these charitable organizations could use the skills that you have. Go put them to great use. But so just help them find what it is that they're going to do when they retire. And then also drip in on those messages exactly how this could look. Like it doesn't have to be hey, I buy your book of business, and immediately all remnants of your existence will be erased. It could be like, hey, let me buy your book of business, and then I'll contract with you for the next year. I want you to write a book on, some of the life lessons that you've learned, financial lessons you've learned, that we can then give to clients, and then make sure that's a gift we give going forward. Or maybe it's you stick around on the team, and what I want you to do is put together a mentorship program. So anytime we hire or bring in a new team member, they get to know the business how you see it, which is this beautiful, wonderful thing that helps people achieve their dreams. So help them see that this is a legacy thing that they are selling. Yeah. This is not I just sold my kid and now I can't see him anymore, right? Make sure this is an ongoing thing. Drip that before, and then as you're doing the buyout, help them see it again.
And inevitably, we have someone here who's watching this because you're looking to sell your book, or you're looking to buy a book and kind of thinking, I'll buy this book, work it 5, 6, 7 years, and then I want to sell my book. So the encouragement likewise to you is start doing this now. Start thinking through, what does your post financial advisor life look like? How are you creating the value in your legacy, and what are you going to do? Because some of the greatest value you can create in a book that you're going to sell is by talking about what's the next stage for you that doesn't interfere with the stage you're in now. It allows you to hand that off to, whether it's your son or daughter, if you're talking to your son or daughter about buying you out and taking over your practice, or whether just selling it to somebody else. If you're looking to exit, you need to have a purpose that still adds value and creates maybe your ability to interact with some of these people, but in a way that you are no longer the financial advisor. That's going to make your transition and your sellout, and therefore your payout on that sell, far more valuable than you can really comprehend. So
100%. So these are all the things as far as prepping, like being ready yourself and your business, being ready to be able to integrate other books of business, finding them, right? Going out there and looking for them, and starting in those drip messages so that you can start building a rapport so that you are the advisor they choose to sell to. Making sure that you value that book appropriately so that you're not overpaying, because we all want to underpay for value, obviously. And then finally, like, how are you going to go through and integrate that book to ensure that the assets stick around and that you glean the most value from it? So this is the process. Now, I know we didn't go into the exact details. I didn't give you the exact script to use when you call the advisor. We didn't talk through the exact wording of the introduction letter. These are all things we have. These are all things that we can help you with if this is a process that you go through. So now we are at that point in our show that you need to get a goodie bag. So
thanks for hanging out. Yeah,
we will put up on the screen. Are we sharing it now? Yep. So we have up on the screen what you can download. You should have the QR code if you want to just use your phone and look at it, or you can type in that link.
And
at the bottom.
Paige just put it in chat for those of you who just want to click a link. If you're
just click
all about just clicking the link.
And so all of that is possible. You can go in and get these great documents. And in that questionnaire, it does ask if you would like some help in this initiative or any initiatives, and we can help you work those out. Our coaches here are very well versed in helping folks do this and preparing a book to sell, buying a book, evaluating a book. We have questionnaires you can use to ask the advisor to get through all this evaluations. So we have all this stuff ready for you. You just let us know if you need it.
So it's really good talking to you guys. We appreciate you guys taking the time to be here today. This is your goodie bag. This is your treat. So before this seminar concludes and we kind of end, make sure you get that link. Candidly, I love doing this. I've done this with a few of my clients. I've helped them acquire books. I've had a few clients in recent years go through the process of selling their books to someone else and exiting. And this is kind of one of those really cool moments in a professional career. And so if we can help you guys be successful in doing this, fill out that survey. We want to help you on either side of that equation and be successful in whatever it is.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everybody.